All right. So please put us on mute when you can, so we don't pick up any extra background noise. If you're speaking, there's a large group today, and we're expecting quite a few more. Please introduce yourself. We have a few folks that are calling in because of the internet connections. Um, Introduce your name and your company, and please use the chat box if you have questions. We will be actively monitoring it today. And I just want to welcome you all and thank you for being here. And I'm going to turn it over to our president, Art Rento.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for, once again, thank you for taking the time to join. Um, our coffee with the ILLBA is something that has grown into a positive industry movement. We've been able to bring some great speakers, some great information to membership, and we continue to do that today. These sections, they provide members with education, networking opportunities. It's just a great thing. Today's topic is going to be centered around the state of industry and business opportunities, things that are changing in labor, ways that we can get involved and understand what's happening within our industry. We have Matt Daus with us with Windels, Marx, Lane, and Mittendorf. Matt is, he's a top-notch guy. He was commissioner in New York. I mean, he's there. He's got his finger on everything that's happening in the industry, and we're very fortunate to have him as a long friend of the Illinois Limousine and Bus Association, and for him taking the time to kind of get us up to date today and in the industry. After we hear from Matt, we're going to kind of do a little roundtable discussion, see what other people are feeling, or answer any questions. We'll open for topics, go through questions, and just kind of sum it up. But there's a lot happening in the industry. There's a lot changing in the industry, and I think everyone within the industry, whether we like it or not, has to be abreast of what's happening. I'd like at this point to introduce our board. I'm Art. We have Kaya with Flash Limousine and Buses, Beth Cox with Cox Livery. Everybody knows Paula. Scott Delheimer with Class Act. Lynn with Galaxy. Mike McDaniels with Shriver Transportation Insurance. Chris Norland with Nationwide Bus Sales. Tracy, who was with Windy City, she's now with me. And Brian Sheedy with Epic Limo. Without any further ado, let's kind of get moving on, and Tracy, take it.
Okay, so it is my pleasure to be able to introduce Matt Daus. Matthew Daus currently serves as Transportation Technology Chair at the City University of New York's CUNY Transportation Research Center of City College of New York, where he conducts research and continues to be extensively published as an expert on ground transportation regulation and technology. As a CUNY Distinguished Lecturer for the past 9 years, he taught courses on transportation history, policy, sustainability for higher regulation, and technology. Mr. Daus also continues to serve for the past 10 years as president of the International Association of Transportation Regulators, otherwise known as IATR, a nonprofit educational and advocacy peer group of government transportation regulators from around the world promoting best regulatory and innovative practice. Commissioner Daus is the longest serving chairman of the New York City Taxi and Limousine Commission, TLC, serving for 8.5 years. Prior to his time as commissioner, Mr. Daus served executive and other positions in New York City government for almost 20 years at several agencies, including as general counsel to the TLC and the NYC Community Development Agency, as special counsel to the TLC and NYC Trade Waste Commission, as a NYC Human Rights Prosecutor, and as commissioner of the NYC Civil Service Commission. Mr. Daus is a partner and currently chairs the transportation practice group at Windels, Marx, Lane, and Mittendorf, LLP. It goes without saying that Mr. Daus has held several titles within the ground transportation sector and continues to understand our challenges and advocates on our behalf. For that, we are extremely grateful. It is my pleasure to now turn it over to Matt Daus.
Thanks. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for that kind introduction, Tracy and Art and Paula. And it's great to be here and see some familiar faces on this cold day, even down in Texas. Now you know what we feel up here in the Northeast. Reminds me of that time when Atlanta wasn't ready for the snowstorm. Everybody had to walk away from their cars. So we're happy to send some of our snow plows down. Are we ready to share the screen, Paula?
Yes, this sharing should be available
Okay,
to you.
Okay, great.
There you
Get
go.
on here. Can you see the screen? You see my PowerPoint?
No, but I do see that young guy in the background.
Oh yeah, that was a long time. That was a long time ago. Yeah, much thinner and hairier days. Okay, I'm trying to get this thing minimized here. Okay, so I don't have all these photos interfering with the screen. Okay, just give me 1 second. Okay, let's go back. All right. All right. So when Paula, Art, and Tracy and I had a chat a few weeks ago about what might be the best topic to talk about, in addition to the state of the industry, rather than just talking about how bad things are, we thought it would be a great idea to talk about what else is going on out there. As Tracy indicated in the bio, I kind of have my everything. So, and all over the country and the world. So I'd like to share some of what I've been seeing with you. These would include not just business opportunities, but also with the law firm hat, some of the different legal options and business options you may have. So where do we go from here? We have PPP money. We've stayed afloat. Business is not back. It's far from it. What are my options? We think it's coming back. We're not sure exactly when. What's going to happen to my business? Should I buy, sell, declare bankruptcy? Should I just hold my breath? Should I be doing other things with my business in this interim period? Now that there may be other business opportunities that I'm missing. And how can we get involved with ILLBA? What you can do to help the group help you. So we're going to deal with a lot of different topics today, including, of course, the labor issue, which weighs heavily on everybody's minds. But, I think we've already covered who I am and where I am. And this is the contact information to best get me at the bottom. And I can share the PowerPoint with all of you after we're done. So let's just talk about, the state of the industry. I don't think we need to spend too much time on this because we all know that it's pretty darn bad out there. I think the good news is that before all of this happened, limousine companies already started integrating into the bus industry. That's also part of the bad news because the bus industry is hurting worse than anyone else at this point in time. So while we were getting on the right path, I still think it is the right path to some degree, and we'll get into that. But we're going to cover both topics: limousines, for-hire vehicles, black cars, and also the bus impacts. There's not much data out there that's really reliable. New York City has probably the best data set, so we'll just go through that real quickly to just show a little bit about what's happening out there. So in April, the number of trips plunged by 93%, after the lockdown was announced, compared to January of 2020. And even by the end of last year, ridership was still down by 78%. So obviously we all know what's going on. The impacts on business travel have trickled down to us, and we're pretty much still at a standstill. And for those of you who didn't get PPP money or other types of relief, it's just really, really been difficult for everyone involved. They've been holding on for dear life. We are not able to get the best data yet. We don't have really good national data, but I'm not sure how much it matters. We all know it's bad. This is a chart. This is a Zello survey that was done. It's not tremendously accurate, but it's the best that we could find just to show what's going on nationally. As you can see that, freight and trucking, logistics and delivery are doing quite well. They've grouped together taxi and limo in the blue line that you'll see. And, it obviously tracks the lockdowns if you look at the dip in April coming back in May. And I believe that where we have actually exceeded freight and trucking come August has something to do with the package delivery. A lot of cities, had decided to outsource and give taxi and some black car operators the ability to assist in package delivery, food delivery for seniors, the Meals on Wheels social service programs in New York, for instance. Not everybody has done that, but I think the package delivery has helped, keep the industry afloat. to some extent. I haven't seen many black car and limo operators involved. It's been mostly taxi that I've seen, but I think that this is one of the opportunities we'll be talking about. So let's talk about the opportunities. Like what's going to happen when we come back. I mean, I've been telling operators that during the pandemic, you should be or should have been reaching out to your clients, see if there's anything that they need, stay in constant contact with them so that you can make sure that the duty of care and the safety issues that you're addressing in your fleet are there, that you're ready to go when business starts coming back. I think most people understand and realize that in terms of corporate travel, it's going to be a slow comeback. And it could start hopefully with a conference season and travel in the fall, but no one's, I think, really seriously contemplating getting back to where we were before until 2022. So this is going to be like a trial and error period, I believe. If you talk to the folks at the GBTA and the people that track what's expected on the travel side, what I've seen with clients so far is regional travel. They're not taking airlines. There are some companies that won't allow people to travel. You can't without quarantining. So they're renting cars or they're traveling. If you're 2 or 3 states away, they're going by car. We've seen that companies are concerned about putting their people back on mass transit. So usually there's actually a new market developing here. And Empire CLS is in the middle of this with a company known as HIP. And there may be others, but these are the ones that I'm aware of. I know Bauer Transportation on the West Coast and others have been doing corporate shuttles for forever. I think that the corporate shuttle market is going to be something that, at least for big corporations, would make more sense than individual for-hire transport to work in an interim period. I think there's a period where companies may be concerned about putting people on mass transit and employees being hesitant about coming back. To have a controlled environment where they can get on a shuttle with all of their other employees, have contact tracing, testing, temperature checks. There are companies out there that are starting to do this. In New Jersey and New York, David Seelinger has partnered with a startup known as HIP that was doing intercity bus services. And just as an example of something that you could be looking into yourself, if not partnering with this company directly. I think that they don't have an exclusive with Empire, but they're doing a lot of work with Empire. They're cleaning shuttles or buses after each use. They're setting maximum vehicle capacity limits, controlling who rides what vehicles at what time, ensuring passengers sit the recommended social distancing apart from each other, face covering enforcement, staggered arrival or departure times, and tracing contacts. These are some innovative things that you could look into. They call it HIP for Business. Other corporate shuttle companies doing this are Here Mobility and a company known as We Drive You. And other opportunities are obvious: package delivery. Especially if you have employees as chauffeurs and you don't have the business now. A lot of black car and limo companies were doing package delivery forever.
Joe Zayed.
But right now is a great opportunity to get into it.
Join the meeting.
There's a company known as ILLBA, which we've been working with in New York, that has partnered with a bunch of operators. Nationally, I think they partnered with Z-Trip and Bill George from the taxi industry, but locally, they serve as a clearinghouse. So basically, they'll integrate with any taxi dispatch or limo dispatch system or any apps that you're using, and they will look at what you're doing with your passengers and work around your passenger transport and allow for package delivery options for the drivers directly, they're independent contractors, through you, or for your company directly. So there are people doing this. I was actually surprised at how seamless it was. If you're interested, I could have them, give a presentation. They're basically turnkey, and it could be extra income for your companies. Because they deal with all the different package and logistics delivery folks, and they funnel it through their API directly to you. So that's some other things people have been doing. We all know some of us are already involved with NEMT. I think, the NEMT field is split. You have the private paratransit, and you also have the public paratransit. And I think there's business opportunities here moving forward. Years ago, 10 to 20 years now, I've been advocating for a takeover of the public paratransit system by black cars and taxi cabs. The government doesn't do a good job of it. The government pretty much wastes about $60 per passenger in subsidies by having multi-passenger vans transporting people who have disabilities as part of the public programs. In New York City, we started a pilot program when I was commissioner that has become permanent to date, and has provided a steady source of income and better experiences, for passengers. The black car industry has been involved with it now for years. Corporate Transportation Group, Mr. Eddie Slinnen, and Curb, and some of the apps and others have all been involved in this project. And it reduces it's basically point-to-point travel for people who would otherwise get into a van with multiple passengers, which is not as safe right now. Getting into a point-to-point travel at least 1/3 less the amount of money it would spend on subsidizing these bigger vans that have been the mainstay of public paratransit. So I think this savings that I've published and talked about for years is something that governments are going to be looking to implement, I think, now more than ever. I think they've held off on doing this probably because of vendor relationships and having these long-standing relationships with these paratransit companies and brokers. I think that's going to all change. The FTA Mobility Sandbox program was experimenting with using taxis and black cars, and even Uber and Lyft to do public paratransit work. And I think its time has come now. So what's happened in New York, I think it's going to happen all over the country. So I would encourage you to get involved and inquire about it, or if not, push your public transit, Pace Bus, or whoever is involved in providing paratransit in your industry, push them to do a program that will do that. In addition, making yourself available on the private side to provide these services. There's an entity known as NEMTAC, which I encourage all of you to get involved in. NEMTAC is a group that was formed. I was their keynote speaker at their inaugural conference in Arizona. I've never seen such disruption. I never saw the taxi industry disrupting anything, frankly. But the taxi industry is actually disrupting the broker model because they don't have much business left. So they have the wheelchair accessible taxis. And this group is putting together duty of care standards for making sure that NEMT private transportation is done in accordance with a certain set of standards that will reduce risk, provide good customer service. They're developing these standards now. There's an actual board and accreditation commission, and their goal is to have a stamp of approval to companies that are doing hospital and Medicaid and Medicare reimbursement work. So I think it's important for your organization's members not to be left behind. So if you're not already involved, I could be happy to make the contacts with you so that you can get involved with this group. Because if this standard becomes adopted, if you're not meeting the standard, you could be out of work. And I think a primary impetus for doing this also is that Uber Health and Lyft are trying to get into the marketplace. And we all know what those duty of care issues are, right? With the corporate travel managers. The same thing applies to government paratransit work and NEMT work on the private side. There's concern that they don't have the proper vetting under the TNC laws. And, this could really play to the limo industry strengths if you're looking to get further involved in this type of work. And now we're gonna break in between the different sections for questions. So we're almost done with the overview. I'm going to talk a little bit about vaccines, which has been on everybody's minds lately. And I think if you look at some of the corporate travel surveys, McKinsey did one that shows that the number one indicator for bolstering confidence in the return of the corporate travel market is vaccine availability and vaccine readiness. The importance of getting your chauffeurs and bus drivers vaccinated is critical. I think that whether the vaccine works perfectly or not, I think this is really the placebo or the thing that is going to get people going in the economy. And it's important to make sure that, number one, your drivers are prioritized. Number two, that you get the vaccine for them if they're willing to do it, and promote that in your marketing materials. The CDC, there's been so much confusion on this issue. There's an advisory committee on immunization practices that recommended phased allocation. It's clear to me that none of these folks had any understanding how our industries operate. I mean, they clearly did not get the advice of the right people when they put this together, and I think their reasoning was structured. They also made a modal choice, which I thought was wrong, by putting public transit transportation workers at the front of the line ahead of private transportation. I don't think that was a mistake. I think many states and the federal government were, incredibly talking about truckers getting it before passenger transportation, which makes no sense. The other thing I think that they got wrong is I think intentionally are looking at their budget deficits for mass transit, and I think we need to call them out for not putting private drivers on the same vaccination priority list as public buses and trains. I think that this is something that can and should be done in different parts of the state and the country. And what they basically did is they put us, taxi and limousine services in 1C as opposed to 1B. And states, just so states have the absolute authority to do whatever they want to do. Okay. In fact, the CDC even said that if they want to specifically prioritize private drivers to go up with the public bus workers, that they can do that. And some states have done it. Alaska, Arizona, thankfully the state of Illinois has, New York City, Oregon, Washington, and specifically in Illinois, in the vaccination plan, it includes public transit workers, flight crews, bus drivers, train conductors, taxi drivers, paratransit drivers. The unfortunate thing about what was done in Illinois is that there's no specific mention of limousines. Limousines, are in the same industry as rideshare and taxi drivers for all practical purposes and should be in phase 1B, and they're not. So I'd encourage you to lobby for that, very quickly, like we did in New York City. And I'll get into that in a minute. Bus drivers, most states have put private commercial bus drivers in phase 1B, but make no specific mention of private sector counterparts. So in Illinois, public transit workers in phase 1B include bus drivers among other commercial passenger transportation providers. So I think the big issue for Illinois really is the limo drivers, not necessarily the bus drivers. I did, just so you can get a flavor for how you can make a difference, I called out the governor and the mayor and everybody involved in New York City. I wrote an op-ed. We laid out the case. You have an increased risk when you get into these vehicles. We're an essential service. It's critical to our recovery. We did not get all this money that the airlines got, from the federal government. We were left behind for all practical purposes. So after I wrote this article, it created a lot of controversy. I got all of the mayoral candidates, the leading mayoral candidates, to support it. I mean, they were all looking for my endorsement anyway, so it was easy to ask them to support it, but it made sense. I also got the former head of the CDC, Tom Frieden, to support it. So we really put pressure on the governor and the mayor, and they capitulated. And now our taxi and black car and limo drivers are all getting the priority vaccination. You could do it too. I'm happy to help. Let me know if there's anything I could do, given the numerous hats that I have, or to help get support in the industry. So I think that's pretty much the first leg of the presentation. Paula, Tracy, Art, I'm happy to take a few quick questions about some of the business opportunities, and then we'll delve into some of the legal stuff.
Okay, so we have a question from Peggy at Adventure Travel, and her question is, what do you think about the SBA government contracting programs? Does that also cover paratransit and any MT?
Yeah, well, yes, the SBA programs are agnostic when it comes to relief by industry. So any business that meets the criteria would be eligible.
All right. Okay. Any other questions? I don't see any here.
I have a question.
Who is that?
Tim from Boulevard in Kansas City.
Thank you.
What are the legal ramifications of marketing that you have staff who has had the vaccine, as far as like HIPAA and whatnot? Because I know companies have been able to get their chauffeurs to the front of the line and have been offered vaccines, and numerous chauffeurs have declined getting the vaccine.
Well, I think it can be done consistent with HIPAA. It really depends on the disclosure and the consent involved. I think I'm not a HIPAA expert, but I could definitely get back to you about that question specifically.
But I see it even as, if you have a client that, requires or requests someone who's been vaccinated, the employee would have to notify you whether or not they've been vaccinated, and I see that as somewhat of a HIPAA violation. Now, I understand that there are a lot of people that are proud that they've been vaccinated, and in those cases, I don't see it an issue. But for those that aren't open about it, I see it being some HIPAA violations or some HIPAA issues there.
Yeah, it could be an issue, but there's a way to do it. I think the real issue is consent, and the issue could be a policy that you enact as well. I mean, there's a way legally to do it compliant with HIPAA. So that's something we can go over offline if you'd like. But there's a way to do it.
Okay, thank you.
And also it's the way you market it with the folks that are involved. You can market generally. I mean, that we do have drivers that are in this category. I think the real issue is if you start to force someone to get it, or you disclose without their permission, that could be the issue. But if it's consensual, that's really the path, I believe. So let me. I'm going to talk to my healthcare experts at the firm. What I didn't mention, and we're going to get into it in a minute. When we talk about the legal issues, is that we're a full service law firm, so we have healthcare lawyers, we have merger and acquisition lawyers, bankruptcy lawyers. So it's important that you look at the multifaceted issues that come about whenever you're coming up with a solution to get back into the marketplace. But there's a way to get this done, and we'll get you more specific advice on it.
Thank you. Are there other questions? Okay, I think we can proceed.
Okay. All right. So like I indicated, our firm, I founded the transportation practice over 10 years ago. It's actually coming on our 11th year now. And, I chair the transportation practice group. We have about 150 lawyers, and we do business all over the country and the world, whether it's consulting or litigation or business deals. We represent a lot of banks, and we do a lot of business transactions on the transportation side, buying, selling, merging. And we're specialists. We have one of the leading bankruptcy practices in the country. We handle the Madoff bankruptcies. We have a really good team there. So our rates are flexible at our firm because we're a middle market firm. We have, so we sometimes get some of the business from the smaller operators or the smaller firms, and also those who can't afford Skadden Arps and some of these big firms who are probably some of your clients. They come to us, especially, a lot of firms hire us directly because they don't understand the industry. So we've been getting a lot of inquiries lately about what I should do in my business. We've been at a stalemate. A lot of the advice we've been giving to our clients has been mostly about the SBA loans and the payroll protection program. So we're going to start by covering what other options are available in terms of short-term relief. Then we're going to go into the proverbial question of what should I do next? Should I buy another company? Should I sell my company? Should I file for bankruptcy? What are my options? Because I'm concerned as to what things are going to look like in the next couple of months. So we all know what the impact has been. So we're going to go over the assistance programs, M&A, and in bankruptcy. All right, so we have actually a 2.0 payroll protection program. The Economic Aid Act that was rushed through on December 27th, right before the end of the year, had $284 billion in additional funding. The loan eligibility and forgiveness provisions were updated in this new law, and the original funding, transportation and warehousing, sector received 229,000 plus loans, which was only about 3% of all the PPP loans given out around the country, totaling about 17.5 billion. So there was some relief. Most people that you talk to have received it. We opened up the new applications on January 11th of this year with community financial institutions, and fully opened it to all lenders on the 19th. So the first draw PPP loans are as follows. For first-time borrowers, your company is eligible for 2.5 times your average monthly payroll, with capping your employees at 100 grand on an annualized basis, similar to the first program. The loan amount is capped at 10 million, and it's 100% forgivable if you use it for 60% of the payroll costs, and 40% for certain expenses in the covered period, 8 to 24 weeks, similar to the first program. In terms of the first draw PPP loans, eligible expenses have been expanded to now include rent, covered mortgage interest and utilities, covered worker protection and facility modification expenses, covered property damage costs, covered payments to suppliers and payments for business software or cloud computing services and certain back office functions. So as time goes on, more clarity has been provided in these programs and more things have been covered. Every time there's been additional guidance or revisit of the program, it's become more liberal in nature. In the Economic Aid Act, the forgiven expenses may now also be deducted as business expenses. There was a lot of gray area on this point. So this reverses the IRS ruling that borrowers not double dip and deduct those expenses that were paid through the PPP loan funds and forgiven. I gave a speech at the TTA last fall in Atlanta, and everybody was concerned about their forgiveness applications. And my advice to all of you then and now is that there's no rush, in my view, to start being forgiven. No, if your borrower, if your lender is not asking for it, I do believe that as time goes on, what can be forgiven and the forgiveness procedures are going to become more liberal in nature. And remember, this is free money. It still is a grant. And as long as you're keeping good records and you're doing everything you need to do on the record keeping side, you should be fine. You shouldn't, in my view, be in a rush to pay this back, especially if they may change the rules to make it easier. So on the second draw PPP loans, the second program, a borrower is generally eligible if they received a first draw loan and will or have used the full amount only for authorized uses. You have no more than 300 employees, and you can demonstrate at least a 25% reduction in gross receipts between comparable quarters in 2019 and 2020. So this is not difficult to do. Here's an example. Limo company has 50 grand in the second quarter of 19, gross receipts of 30,000 in the second quarter. You've experienced a revenue reduction of 40% between the quarters, and you're eligible for a loan. The second draw loans are capped at 2 million as opposed to the higher amounts in the first draw program. There will be more guidance, like I said, especially now that there's a new administration in town. I do believe that those who received significant loans of, in the millions of dollars may be subject to more audit. If you receive something that was on the lower end, I think it's highly unlikely that they're going to be auditing people to the same extent. I think that there's going to be more flexibility and an easier way to be forgiven, and that they're going to move those applications at some point in time. One thing I do caution people is to keep the good records, because remember, there's a new administration here, which is critical and will be critical of the old administration. So you have to just bear that in mind, that there may be people internally that didn't agree with the program or didn't like Trump, and now they're going to go after people who got the money, and have inspector generals and people looking at who may have screwed the system and put fault at the prior president's doorstep, right? That's something that we should expect. So it doesn't, if you're doing the right thing, it doesn't matter. If you haven't been great on your record keeping, you need to get on top of it immediately, because if anything's out of place on the record keeping side, it could really cause problems. So just a reminder, remember, this is free money. If you're forgiven, the balance will convert to a 1% fixed rate loan with a term of 5 years. And the PPP program on phase 2 is going to end on March 31st, assuming the funds are available. Like anything else, they keep extending the time frame, happens over and over again. So you got to keep posted. We have daily COVID updates that we've started over a year ago. If you're not on our list, please email me at mdos@windelsmarx.com. We're happy to place all of your members on the list if you're not getting them. Every day we put out national, international, and local news to members of the transportation industry on all COVID pandemic related items. So we follow very, very closely everything that's happening in Washington on this issue. And we use our contacts to get the scoop on a lot of things that are going on. Now, buying and selling, M&A, COVID loans are only a stopgap measure. You really got to look at the current environment, and really the time is now. I think last year, if you were thinking about buying or selling, a lot of people looked at their businesses and they said, this is a great opportunity for me to shed some weight. If you haven't done that, you can still do it. No matter what happens, in this industry, whether you want to stay in business as you are, or whether you want to buy or sell your company, there's no downside by looking at trimming the fat in in your organization, making things more efficient, spending time on training and doing everything you can to make your organization look viable, including pretty much a due diligence exercise. I would do a due diligence exercise as if you're selling your company now. You can only be made a better company if you do that, because this money is going to run out. Things may not come back as quickly as we would like. And you want to be in a position where all your options are on the table. So in terms of the longer term implications, this is a great exercise to go through. In terms of the due diligence process, like when we get, and we are on all sides of a deal, our firm and my practice represents buyers, sellers, and we also, there are attorneys on both sides already. People come to us and ask us to do the due diligence on a particular company that's being purchased. So this would include looking at cash flow, revenue streams, financial projections, review of subsidiaries, the market for the target company services, the liabilities, of course, the risks, pending lawsuits that are out there. There's usually a checklist that we use that looks at revenue stream, leases, licenses, vendor contracts. What's the status of those contracts? Are we in breach? Contract assignments. It's really an intense undertaking, even for a small business. And I think the big problem is last year, there was no way for anyone to seriously get a CPA to value a company, because of the uncertainty. But now I think that reasonable projections can be made based upon prior cash flow and certain assumptions of business return at certain levels. I think there's enough data out there that you could actually, outside of valuing the assets, come up with a revenue projection to lead to the valuation of a business. And even if you can't get something that's really good in terms of a solid valuation, I think if your company has assets and you have customers and you have tight control over those customers and contracts, that's valuable, one way or the other. Even if your company is not there and doing business right now, it's still something that, as a contingency, is something that's of value to other companies. So, in terms of the checklist, if when we do due diligence, we look at your organizational documents, your filings with the state and federal and local taxes, your insurance coverage. There's a lot that can be done on the risk mitigation front. If you're looking into getting your company to reduce insurance costs, the companies have not been very forgiving. Insurers around the country very rarely have been giving out discounts to our industries, which are considered high-risk industries. Some have and some haven't. So there are captive insurance companies and self-insurance options that you can be looking into. Are your employee manuals and policies in good shape? If you don't have a COVID health and safety plan, you should have one in place. But also your EEO policies, any claims and complaints that are current and have been filed with your company internally. These are things that we would look at. OSHA or other violations. These are things that you need to be on top of and as part of the due diligence process. And also, obviously, whether you have all the proper licenses, are you in good standing with FMCSA? These are all things that we look at. In terms of a transaction, obviously there's the option of an asset purchase, a stock purchase, or a merger. So asset purchases can be structured to acquire the target company's assets and not most of or all of its liabilities. Sellers will generally prefer a stock or a membership interest purchase, which is simpler. A stock purchase does not enable a buyer to exclude the seller's liabilities. The due diligence is even more important in terms, what happens to those existing liabilities, whether it be a bus or a limousine crash, in the company that's being sold, and who's going to assume that liability after the deal is done is really the big issue that lawyers get involved in. Stock purchases generally require all owners to approve the purchase, so a merger may be preferable in that situation. The merger will usually be approved by a majority of the owners and effectively forces a sale by all the owners. So even in a smaller business where you have 2 or 3 partners, these issues could be as big as the movie Wall Street. With and sometimes they can be even more intense because you're not dealing with a board of shareholders who are kind of not known to you. You're dealing with people that you've been working with for years, and if you have a disagreement about these type of things, it can get very ugly. Valuations. The financial due diligence is critical to have a valuation of the target company. In addition to valuing the assets, discounted cash flow, or other methodologies for the limo company items like the market size, the strength or desirability of the market, competitive advantages, and the business history contracts could be significant factors. So all the things I was talking about at the beginning of the presentation, if you haven't done that, do it if you can. There's no downside to it. You know, if you go, it's going to be looked at favorably if you do these different new business lines and you've been keeping your folks busy. But most importantly, like in the medallion industry, for instance, we represent a lot of the banks and do, you know, a lot of medallion transactions, foreclosures and bankruptcies. There's a way to value a business, even if there's no business coming in. You know, the value of the open market medallion dried up and no transactions took place. So all of the CPAs we would hire to value these assets in bankruptcy court were all based upon discounted cash flow analysis. And you can, as an accountant or a financial professional, we do get our experts to make certain assumptions that the courts and reasonably minded people would accept. So there is a way to get a valuation. I think it's going to be a little bit easier.
Okay. Bring the youngsters is
Okay. It's going to be difficult. It ain't going to be easy, but there's a way to do it. Bankruptcy. Okay. So we've already seen some bankruptcies in the industry. I think more, unfortunately, may file. You know, Chapter 7 means you're closing and liquidating. Chapter 11 is a reorganization that usually requires with the creditor committee a liquidation plan, you know, an orderly liquidation and a reorganization of the business. There is something known, if you haven't heard of this, as a subchapter 5 of the bankruptcy code. So, and you know, Congress, when it passed the CARES Act, allowed for people to take advantage of this and incentivize them if they desired not to go the route of a more complicated Chapter 11 or reorganization of your business. So subchapter 5 normally caps the debts at 2.7 million, which is expanded in the CARES Act to a threshold of 7.5 million. You don't, under subchapter 5, reorganizations require a creditors committee, and it allows equity holders of the company to retain their equity even if the unsecured creditors have not been paid in full. There's no obligation to file a separate statement, which saves time and money for the debtor. So it's a streamlined Chapter 11, and it may be something that is in the sweet spot for limo companies. If you feel that you just were in a very bad spot before the pandemic and the relief and the uncertainty put you in a very, very bad spot, you might want to consider subchapter 5. So if you have any questions about this, I'd be happy to put you in touch with our bankruptcy lawyers to give you some advice. You know, the increased debt threshold for subchapter 5 expires on March 7th. So if this is something that you're considering, you know, the incentives under the CARES Act, you need to be looking at this very quickly. I have an article coming out in the next issue of Chauffeur Driven, a very extensive article. I think it's something like 10 pages that goes into extensive details about all of these things we're talking about. Like, so if you didn't understand the differences between 7, 11, 5, there'll be tedious detail in the Chauffeur Driven magazine talking about whether you should borrow, buy, sell, merge, file, or retire. I mean, people are looking at all their options right now. So you know where to find Chauffeur Driven magazine. If you have any questions after the article, let me know. Do we have any questions now before we go to the last leg of our PowerPoint?
Why, we most certainly do. Let me go scroll up here. Let's see. One person asked, if we took the SBA loan, but not the grant and go bankrupt, what happens?
Well, I mean, it gets considered as debt, just like any other debt that you have. I'd have to have my bankruptcy attorneys advise on specific the priority would be. Usually federal governments and state governments take priority as lien holders in any bankruptcy. But yeah, it gets factored in like anything else.
Okay, thank you. And the next question was, what I think this was in terms of the PPP, does utilities include gas and fuel?
Yes.
Okay, I thought it did too.
Let's stay on that one for a second. Matt, so what is your interpretation of the fuel? So we've heard several different operators and even some banks that say that fuel is not included.
That's right too.
So what is your interpretation, or how can we receive verbiage that we can prove to our bank that fuel is allowable?
Yeah, I mean, they were right at the beginning of the program, but they put out guidance that changed that and clarified it. So I'll get I'll get Tracy, you Paul or not, some language and pull it out and send it to you.
Thank you.
That would be awesome.
Okay, that's an excellent question.
Right.
All right.
Next question. I do have a question, another question.
Okay, go ahead. Then I have some questions that were taken.
Yeah. Has there been any discussion about EIDL loans of a certain amount or less being forgiven?
Well, no. However, there's that stipend that you get when you get an EIDL loan, which is automatically forgiven.
Yes.
But other than that, no. And there's been no discussion about that at all. I really don't think that's going to happen. I think it's going to be hard, because these are two separate programs. They're two separate divisions of the SBA. They don't talk to each other either. And whether you have a new president or not, these divisions of the federal government, they're their own. They have their own. They take on a life of their own.
Right.
There's the bureaucracy. There's the silent government, as you call it, and there's a big division between. I know I have contacts that work there. The PPP and the EIDL people don't talk to each other. They're two different divisions, and I think it would be hard to do that given changing the ground rules. I don't think Congress is going to allow that. It would be a congressional act to do that, and I don't think that's going to happen. I think you're going to see very little changes. I think we may have one more round of funding at this point, and I do believe that the guidance could become more liberal in interpreting that as we go on. But we may have one more round of PPP. But if the vaccines start to work, even if they're not really working, I think that this is the path that we're going on to get the economy going. So even if we find out that some of the vaccines are not what we thought they were, they are the impetus for, I think, people to start feeling a little more comfortable going out and getting back out there. So I think the PPP and the other relief programs are going to dry up in terms of a general sense. And I think Congress is more likely to be looking at specific industries, which could be good for us as we get closer. For instance, they in the CERTS Act that they passed, they specifically put 184 million or something like that for the small concessionaires at the airports, right? Unfortunately, it's not clear that this includes those who pick up and drop off at the airports. But I think you're going to get Congress taking a look at those specific industries, restaurant industries that really, despite the PPP, couldn't get done what needed to get done. And I think that there's going to be more targeted approach by Congress in the next year or two.
Okay. All right. I think we had a couple more questions. Let me just scroll up here. Let's see. Regarding the CERTS Act, how do you think they will qualify applicants? Have we heard any updates in the last few weeks?
I believe Treasury and the US DOT have been working together on some of these issues. I have not seen an update on this. I do believe that there's a pot of money that airports get for concessions, and there has not been clarity on that yet, but we're following it. And if you sign up for my newsletter, I'm happy to share that information with you when it comes up.
Okay.
Being on the certs, is it true that they have to have a public comment period? And if so, how long is that period usually? Is that like a 30-day period? And what is the result of a public comment period for the CERTS Act?
Yeah, the federal government, I forget what it is. I think it's usually like 30 days, but I'll double check that and get back to you on the specifics. But whenever rules are passed under the Federal Administrative Procedure Act, then they're required to get public comment and feedback. And it gets published in the Federal Register if they're doing a rulemaking proceeding, and they do respond to it. So if there are points that need to be made, that's the point at which they need to do it. The federal government and state and local governments do have the ability in an emergency situation to truncate or dispense with public comments. I don't know off the top of my head if they've done that here, so I'll check into that and get back to you.
Thank you.
It would be great. I mean, if they are doing it for this particular aspect, that would be great for ILLBA to put some comments in specifically.
Yeah, and I'm just curious, like, how do they plan on qualifying, especially for our industry, that we have a mixture of buses and the limousine industry. So how do they qualify us for the motor coach industry? Are they looking at the MCS filing Are they looking at miles driven? And so I'm just curious how the qualification is going to work.
Well, this is why I think it's important for Tracy, for your group to really be involved in this, because the American Bus Association and the United Motor Coach Association, both of them, I assure you, are on top of this, and they are probably commenting. The issue is that their membership includes a wide range of operators, including motor coach carriers. Those are very different business models from you. So this is something I do believe it's viable for your organization to stay on top of it, because there may be some nuances and twists to your business that don't apply to some of these motor coach carriers. And it's a very different business model, as you know. So I do believe you should stay on top of this. After the call, I'll double check with my staff, and we'll find out what the exact nuances are, and we'll send it to you so you can share it with the group.
Excellent. Thank you.
Okay, let's see. I think there was, I got a text question, so it's not on here. And Tracy, I think we can answer this one. We have one of our members asking, do we think there'll be another state BIG grant? And I think the short answer is right now we don't know that, but we shouldn't rule it out because money is given to the individual states, but we don't have any details right now.
I mean, personally, I would feel that we should be looking for state and municipality grants, the same as what we have been doing the last 6 months, because I do believe in the last stimulus, and Matt, correct me if I'm wrong, that there was a significant amount that was given to states and cities, to rebuild their businesses or the cities themselves. So I would assume that some of that money would be given to the businesses. Matt, what do you think?
Yeah, I think for you, I would not be lobbying Congress for any of these things. You got to go to the state legislature and the local legislature for more. And they've done some programs, for the industry in Chicago too. I don't remember them off the top of my head, but I mean, some of the bigger cities have been doing things to help the transportation industry. If you look around the world, they're way ahead of us. I think in Australia they have, and even in Montreal they have specific grant programs for the industries. I would be lobbying hard for that because there's a story to tell here, and it's an unfortunate one that smaller businesses have been left behind. I mean, even with the CERTS Act and Maxine Waters and others in Congress are pushing for the small concessionaires at the airports to be taken care of. There's the concern about the little person, having been left behind. And I think, you're more in tune with the state and local legislators anyway. I assume most of your work is with them. That's where I would go. I think, unfortunately, states and localities are going to be selfish with the monies that they're going to take care of themselves first. So you have to exert maximum political pressure on them, I think, to get a shot at any of that money. So that's a very viable state and local lobbying effort that is worth the time and effort.
Yeah, I think in the last round, we had the largest allocation in the country for the state of Illinois was 278 million and 2 rounds. So it is very possible they're going to do it again, only because we know there's still a number of distressed areas that need to be rebuilt as a result of the pandemic. So while, I would encourage everyone to continue, anyone that's listening, continue to do your own research and keep an eye on what's coming out from the state of Illinois like we do. We check every site, every group that we know, just to get a heads up on this stuff. But understand that the qualifications may vary from the last 2 rounds. Things are different now. There's still some people trying to rebuild. There's other circumstances. We don't really know, but certainly it's well worth looking at. And if you're a member, you'll hear from us directly on this stuff when we know about it. That's it.
And Paula, before we move on to the next topic, I just want to let everybody know that we are keeping a confidential registry at the firm. I mean, we represent a lot of small, mid-sized and operators, and also we represent a lot of hedge funds. We represent a lot of hedge funds that are interested in the industry. So if you're looking to, buy or sell your company, we have NDAs that can be signed, and we could, put you on a list that meaning that you're up for an acquisition or you're up for a merger or a buyout. And this way, we have a list of options for my clients to look at and to have a conversation. So we treat that with the utmost confidentiality. We're obviously not brokers and we're not making any money off of it. We just want to put people in touch with one another to help each other out. And there'll be all appropriate non-disclosure agreements if you're not comfortable. But if you just want to have a conversation, call me at 646-261-1590 or shoot me an email. And I'm happy to tell you, because I have clients now looking to buy companies. So just let me know.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I think we can move on.
Okay, so the next topic is AB5, Prop 22, and driver benefits. And this is something that we all really need to be thinking about moving forward at this time, because the labor force is in flux. There's been a change politically in the dynamics of the country on the independent contractor versus employee model. And I think these changes will continue to resonate as our state and local governments in blue states and blue cities, and as the country as a whole is becoming more progressive. I mean, for those of you who are Republicans on the line, I'm not optimistic. I mean, there is a chance that in 10 to 20 years, there may not be a Republican Party anymore, that there could just be Democrats that are conservative Dems and progressives and liberals and libertarians. If, when I was in school, when I was going to college, I was brainwashed into democratic philosophy. My political science professors, were talking about global warming and terrorism before it became a thing in the 90s. That was one thing that started happening in the 60s in terms of people going to school being influenced. Without making any political statements here, social media has caused all of this toxic political environment that we have. No question about it. And there's a Generation Z, not just the millennials, who've grown up on how important climate change is, morally making a difference, money isn't important. All of this has played out in the election that we just saw. And, it's no accident we have people like AOC and Bernie Sanders. This has been in the making for a long time. And, the newscasters have become irrelevant. So when you would turn on Dan Rather and watch the news years ago, you would get you would think a balanced story and things are under control. The media is fighting for its life and they look to create news. That's why they loved Trump for many years. And I think what's concerning me is that we are on the path to a progressive philosophy, which is ultimately going to take over the country, because as some of the older legislators retire, some people who are more moderate, this younger group of politicians and an entire generation of people grew up on social media being brainwashed in some ways by a different type of ideology. You see it playing out with the cancel culture. So my big point here is that people really believe, starting with the Occupy Wall Street movement and seeing what happened with Prop 22, taking care of the worker. And this progressive politics is not, I think over time, it's going to affect even, states like Idaho and Wyoming. I think over time, this generation of politicians is going to push the mainstream moderates out. What that means is that you need to really be in tune with not just the working class, the people that are working for you and younger people that you're hiring, but also you need to be cognizant that this is not going anywhere. That this whole concept of independent contractors being taken care of and be giving full benefits, vacation, healthcare, this is something that an entire generation of people believe in. And it's just a matter of time before politically you already see it happening in local legislatures with term limits. We see it in New York, we see it in Chicago, we see it elsewhere. It's going down that road. You can see with your current mayor, this is where it's going. So be ready for it. And AB5, was something that the industry kind of got screwed on in many ways. If you had an independent contractor limo or taxi operation, Prop 22 and Uber and Lyft, they weren't taking care of their competitors. So the passage of Prop 22, which allows for a framework for drivers to continue to remain independent contractors, doesn't apply to taxi and limo operators. So, the ABC test, which makes it almost impossible in certain iterations of it for you to maintain an independent contractor driver, because the prong of the test that says that you need to not be in the same business as the company giving you the work is the problem. You have a transportation company, a limo company, a bus company, and a driver who's an independent contractor. It doesn't mesh with the ABC test in most jurisdictions. You're not allowed to be an independent contractor. It's very difficult to prove that you can be. You know, it's very different if you're somebody who's fixing a door in a transportation company's office and you come in with your toolkit and you're taking the door off. Of course, that's an independent contractor. But if you're in the business of providing transportation as a driver working for a transportation company, then there's a huge problem. And you know, Prop 22 did not come out with its baggage. It doesn't simply say that Uber and Lyft get a free pass. They had to really work the system and come up with a template for a new labor model. So this was the most expensive referendum in California history. They spent $205 million to exempt them from the ABC test, which was basically codified in a statute known as AB 5. And Prop 22 allows app-based ride-hail and delivery platforms, you know, like Grubhub and Uber Eats and so forth, to treat drivers as contractors with a guaranteed 120% of the minimum wage plus 30 cents per mile, plus the opportunity to make more money. This is something that they had to agree to get this prop passed, and this is what the law says. Healthcare contributions equal to 100% of the average employer payment towards the covered California plan, or basically $367 per month. Occupational accident insurance to cover on-the-job industries, measures against discrimination and sexual harassment. It does not offer explicit protection such as workers' comp, unemployment insurance, family leave or sick leave, or allow workers to unionize. Now, this is going to change because this movement has started in California, and there are 26 states that already have some version in case law of the ABC test. 10 states, including New York, apply it to a particular sector like construction or landscaping. So in a lot of these states, it says we have the ABC test, but it only applies here by statute. That could very well happen that they say we have the ABC test, and now we're going to apply it to the limo sector. And now, with the passage of Prop 22, there are two things happening. Before it passed, New York, New Jersey, Oregon, Pennsylvania, Washington, Wisconsin all had various formulations of an AB 5 type proposal in the legislature. In fact, Governor Cuomo in New York, who every day now because of this nursing home thing, he basically made a statement that he's going to pass AB. It's just a matter of not a matter of if, it's when and what it's going to look like. And I think this progressive movement is going to require people to do something. I think politically we may see something different than what we have in ABC, but the force that you're up against now is Uber and Lyft have declared a victory. They see Prop 22 as their path to profitability, and they're going to do the same thing. If you remember, our firm did the amicus brief to the Supreme Court on the Chicago case on behalf of the Transportation Alliance, known as the TLPA back then. And we lost. We went all the way up to the US Supreme Court, and we fought a good battle. But then once we lost that battle, they replicated portions of the TNC law in every state as a cookie cutter law. They're doing the same thing with Prop 22. They're not going to do referendums in different states and cities. What they're going to do, and they're already doing it in New York, is they're going to the governor and the legislature and saying, this is the new labor model. We're taking care of our gig economy workers. You know, this is something that they bought onto and they're willing to do. So they're going to push the passage of a state law in every state that says exactly what Prop 22 says. And maybe they'll try to get some more generous concessions if they can from the legislature. The concern is that, you know, what happens to the limo and the bus industry? Where do they sit in the middle of all this? Should they get the benefits of it or not? I mean, that's a particularized question, but you need to keep an eye on what's going on in your state, because they're going to come around to every state, including Illinois, if they're not already there, looking for some version of Prop 22 to be passed to protect themselves. You know, they need to get back to their investors and say, you know what, here's our path to profitability. Dara from Uber, the CEO, is invested in this. They spent all this money on it. They're going to make sure that it happens. So the question is whether you have a seat at the table. One thing I would keep an eye out for in your localities is in particularly progressive markets like Seattle, for instance, maybe on the West Coast. I'd be concerned about doing what they did in New York City with the minimum wage imposed by the taxi commission. The TLC, in response to the suicides in New York City that took place with the drivers, put together a living wage for the drivers as a condition of getting a license from the regulator. They could do the same thing in Chicago, potentially, the ACP, but they haven't yet, or the council has. In Seattle, they have. And they've adopted what I consider to be a flawed model from the TLC, which is very loosey-goosey about how you do it. The good news is that it only applies to Uber and Lyft in New York City. But the bad news is that as politicians start looking at protecting workers, they may extend these living wage provisions to every operator, limos, taxis, everybody, bus operators. So this completely complicates things, beyond belief.
So Matt, is that formula, I'm sorry not to interrupt you. So that formula includes does that include tips or exclude the tips? Because I've heard different scenarios about that. So when they try to figure out someone has to figure out the calculation of what to bring it to the proper hourly rate.
Now, my understanding is that my understanding is that it does not include tips. I can double check that.
That would make it more
My
complicated.
understanding that it's already complicated. Like it looks like like quantum physics when you look at the equation that these professors from the New School put together. It's based upon social engineering of traffic mitigation and congestion mitigation.
Right.
There's concern that there were too many Ubers and Lyfts before the pandemic, taking people out, driving around without having a passenger in the car, which we know is true in every city. That they want to get a decent response time, so they flooded the market in an open entry system where there were no caps at the time in New York City, and they had so many vehicles that the drivers made less money overall, and that's why they got upset. But what the TLC is doing, instead of just reducing the number of vehicles on the road and just telling them you got to turn your permits in, what they've done by attrition is say, the more your vehicle is not being used under the formula, the more you're going to have to pay the driver. So basically, Uber and Lyft froze the number of drivers on their platform, and they ended up. This system is going to end up leading to Uber and Lyft becoming more like us. They're going to keep their best drivers, the ones who have the best records and do the best work with the highest ratings, and they're going to shrink. It's a foregone conclusion that the industry, even before the pandemic, with the cap and this minimum wage, is going to shrink. And that was what the policymakers wanted. It could have been done a lot more easily. You could have basically told them you have to reduce your permits, or it could have been done easily, but they didn't do it that way. They probably were concerned about a lawsuit if they did it that way. I still think they could have won the lawsuit, but this is something that New York City did, that Seattle copied. It has not got traction with my regulators. The regulators at ITR have not faced this. They haven't told me that we want to do this. The only person I heard from was the city council members in Seattle, who ended up hiring the consultants from the New School that did this for the city of New York. So I think maybe the West Coast, this could happen. I don't think there's a groundswell of support for it, especially if Uber and Lyft start going to the state legislatures with a Prop 22 model. And I'm sure a lot of you probably have heard of the Black Car Fund. And Paula, Art, and Tracy and I were all brainstorming about how now may be the time to get ahead of the curve and get a workers' comp program for independent contractor limo and bus drivers in your legislature preemptively, so that you can tell the legislature that we don't need to do all these things that Uber and Lyft are pushing the industry to do. That if we have independent contractor chauffeurs, rather than put these benefits in place, why don't we take the New York City model, which has been a very successful model. My former chief of staff, Ira Goldstein, who used to work with me at TLC, many of you know him. Yeah. He's vice president over at the TTA, and he's very involved with the limo industries, comes to all the NLA events over the years. And I think the model its time has come. We represent the Black Car Fund. I remember the first piece of legislation I looked at when I was hired by the TLC was this fund in the 90s. And it really is a great solution for the gig economy and for independent contractors. It's not just workers' comp benefits, but other health and risk mitigation telemedicine benefits that the fund has been doing for years now. The way it works is if you're a dispatch under the state law. If 90% or more of your business is on a non-cash basis, which applies, and you could structure this definition any way you want in the state of Illinois if you wanted to take a different approach, that you must join it and you must pass on the costs or the surcharge to your customers. And that money that customers have to pay corporate travel managers, if they get a mandate from the government, it's more likely that they're not going to complain to you, and everybody's on equal footing, and that money becomes part of the pot to pay for the workers' comp claims, and they run it like it's a workers' comp company or insurance company. So the Black Car Fund is a workers' compensation insurance company. They have actuaries, they have claims processes, and they have done very, very well. So well that they've actually been able to get laws passed to allow them to provide additional types of member benefits, including health, telemedicine, vision, and they work very closely with the Independent Drivers Guild, which is a union of F4 drivers in the city of New York, which serves on the board. So this 3% surcharge is, I think, a really good way to go to reduce the cost of your operators. I'd recommend, you all know Ira, happy to arrange to have him come and give a presentation, so that your lobbyists can throw this into the mix. Because this issue, like I said, progressive politics, it ain't going anywhere. This toxic political environment isn't going anywhere, and we're going to get more and more liberal as time goes on, more pro-worker, and the writing is on the wall. So you might as well get ahead of the curve so that you're not playing catch up. And I also think you should argue for a carve out for limousines, which is another thing you might want to talk about. You have to, I think, explain that you're different from Uber and Lyft. So once they start pushing for Part 22 in Illinois, I think you need to point out, number one, that limo drivers typically earn more than TNC drivers. They have more say in when and where they work than contractors, and that many of the companies have full-fledged employees already. So you shouldn't be dragged into this Prop 22, because it's very easy for the legislature to say this law should apply and guarantee a higher wage than even your employee chauffeurs are getting now. Anything could happen in these progressive legislatures these days. Also, you've been decimated by Uber. You guys need a break. They're making this argument for the taxi and limo industry, the GCLA, SARA, and others out in California, TPAC. They're making the argument that, look, it's not bad enough that you screwed us by passing the TNC law, but now you're doubly screwing us by not letting us take advantage of, Prop 22 with reduced provisions. Look, the hybrid model is probably the way I would go. I would say that if you have independent contractor limo and bus operators, that you should maintain a carve out for your industry, but put together something proactive so that you can show that you're doing something for the workers. That's why I think pushing a workers' comp fund would be a great thing for you folks to do. I'll just end on this, since it's the same topic, Paula, and we can take any questions.
Okay.
How can you help the ILLBA on this and other topics? I'm a big fan of grassroots lobbying. So you have a statewide organization. Most of the operators that are on this call probably have a relationship with a state legislature later, a local alderman or whatnot in your district. Most business owners do. You just know who your local.
Did we lose him?
Yeah,
Maybe.
I think he'll be back.
I'd like to kind of, while we're waiting for him to come back, I'd like to kind of pop in real quick and kind of go over a little bit of what our conversation was.
Uh-huh.
As the Illinois Limousine and Bus Association, we've always had trouble raising the necessary funds to get ourselves lobbyists and be ahead of things that are changing in our industry. At this point in time, we've got Uber, Lyft, DoorDash, all these companies that are petitioning our state for some form of AB5 to take place in Illinois. We really don't have a voice at the table. One way to do that would be to get grassroots, which sounds really good, but it's very difficult. And it's for us anyway, it's proven not to win. Really what we need to do is we need to kind of get a lobbyist to protect us and let us know what's happening in the industry and speak on our behalf. The only way to do that is through raising funds. And this Black Car Fund, may be a perfect opportunity. Generally, workers' comp is running between 4.5% and 8-9%. If it's at all possible, to get this black car fund going and everybody contributing 3%, with the idea that if you don't contribute the 3%, at some point you're going to get stuck with the workers' comp fund, which is going to be a much higher amount. But if we're contributing the 3% and we're able to add it to the billing for our customers, then and everyone else is adding it to the billing. So if you want a car in Illinois, you pay the 3%. If you don't pay the 3%, you don't get a car. So it's something that's across the board, but that would give us funds to get lobbyists, to really do a lot to benefit the industry. And Matt touched on a little bit of ways that the Black Car Fund is working and helping New York operators, but it's pretty extensive. I mean, I talked to some operators myself that, have benefited from it in ways that they didn't imagine they would. So that may be a way that we want to go.
But I think the other part of the lobbying thing is, yes, we are contemplating some kind of support, but we still have a challenge, which is that more people who are members or even non-members need to get involved, because it is it's difficult for a small group of people in the association to do the work that needs to get done. And I see some other executives from associations on here today, so I'm not talking out of school. There has to be strength in numbers. We have not been in front of our legislators in Illinois for 5 years. 5 years. Some of us have, some of us haven't, but every time we do go in front of them, they don't know who we are. So there's, in addition to raising money, looking at these funds, there has to be, we need more horsepower behind us. And it
Well,
doesn't,
you know what? We need to be able to contribute to them. We need to be able to raise funds and
yeah,
contribute
or whatever
to
it
people.
is. Mhm.
And you need to know who you're contributing to and contribute to the right people.
And sometimes they
as far
just
as
need to
one
know
of
who
the
we
things-
are. They're not even looking.
Right. I mean, we may want to try to see if we can do some type of an extension through the people that are running New York, or give them some type of a part of it, if maybe even that's the right way to kind of help us get it funded for some period. I don't know. There's a lot to getting this thing up and running. It isn't just like, let's do it and go. First thing is we have to have the legislators in Illinois approve the Black Fund in lieu of workers' compensation. That's the first step. Once they approve the Black Fund, then we need someone to administrate it, someone to collect the dues. You need, there's a lot of infrastructure behind it.
Yeah, we don't have enough information to say much more, I don't think, because we're still learning it ourselves.
But at some point, what we're looking at some point, we're either going to get, if this thing takes place in Illinois, it's going to change our industry, and people are going to look at us and say, okay, either you're paying in like Uber and Lyft are, or you have workers' comp. We're thinking that it's going to force our hand in one way or another. And we're also thinking, or I'm thinking, that we would be in a much better position to have this under our control rather than have it under our legislators' control.
Yeah, manage your own destiny.
Our own program. We're making our own destiny. Exactly, Paul.
Yeah, and you know what? I will, for those of you on the call today, I will, especially for our Illinois, even our Indiana folks, I will attach a link if you haven't seen it already. Our public television station did a quick newscast last week about rideshare and some of the challenges right now and whatnot, and very much hinting toward the Illinois legislators to start looking at some kind of protections. Don't have that nailed down yet, but it was enough of a heads up that I think we can't really ignore it. So I'll share that link with you all too. It's about a 5-minute clip or so. Matt's back. I think Matt's back. Matt, are you back?
Oh, we might have lost them again. Matt did mention the administrator for the Black Car Fund that he could do a presentation for us as well. And I think that would be good sooner than later, just to learn a little bit more about it and how they started.
Yep.
What their challenges were in the beginning. and, and just the pros and cons of it, and, what's become of it, and, how long did it take, before they realized that it was successful.
Yeah. Yep. We can definitely get a call with Ira. That's no problem. Okay. Let's see.
Hi, this is Chris from A-List Limo and Bus, and I just want to say I know that I haven't been involved or active, but I had my hands full. But for the last year, I've been pretty available. So if you need somebody to run their mouth, I'm pretty good at that.
Oh, gee. Okay. This is being recorded. I don't know if you should have said that. No, I'm just kidding. Thank you, Chris. That's funny.
Yeah,
I can always count on Chris for
There he is.
Yeah,
Hey, listen, Matt, we did miss you.
Yeah. But we kept going.
my connection, unfortunately. So
Yeah.
I apologize. It's I don't know what's happening. Get fixed. But I mean, I guess where I was ending is that there's a way for you to organize at the grassroots level with your individual members, and then funnel the information with the letter writing campaigns up to the lobbyist. So that the lobbyist doesn't have to go and to have 50, 100 meetings in the Capitol. That they go right to the leadership, members on board at the local level that you all know in your communities. And I think you being on top of this issue, not just the grants and the relief, but the labor issue is really critical. And I'm happy to help out any way that I can. If you need me to come in as an expert, talk about things that are going on in other cities or countries, I'm happy to help your folks.
I think it's interesting. I think it's interesting because even the city has reached out to us and asked what they can do to make life easier for drivers and operators right now. So we sent out a survey, got some really interesting feedback, and the officers are putting it together to send out to the city, hopefully at the end of the week. But to kind of piggyback off of what you're saying, it's probably the best time right now for anybody, especially whether you're in the city or you're, in any of our big counties where we have a lot of operators, that you just start introducing yourself, even as a small business owner in your area, because it's going to take a while to penetrate all of these different organizations and legislative folks to let them know who we are. And that's half the battle. Once they know who we are, I think that's a very important first step. It's positive to see the city is actually reaching out to us for a change. We all kind of took a step back from that. And we also talked about with Matt, the possibility that we might become our own lobbyists. Don't know if we're going to do that or not, but we have a lot of work ahead of us as a board to figure out. So we are welcoming anyone who wants to get involved. In fact, I encourage you because
the other issue is this thing with the city trying to learn more about our industry and how we pay our drivers and what benefits the drivers get. Suddenly they're very interested in this. And this is happening at the same time that supposedly, the TNCs are lobbying the state for this third classification, if you could call it that. That's kind of like an independent employee, whatever you want to call it. This whole thing's evolving, and suddenly the city's very interested in finding out more about us. We don't know whether to get involved in this thing and talk or shut up and hide in a corner, or really don't know what to do. We're afraid to give them too much information that can come back and bite us all in the ass. Well, at the same time, we want to kind of stay ahead of what might be headed our way. But we're kind of in a trick bag, really, I think.
Yeah,
it's a tough call.
It is a tough call.
Unfortunately, our Paula, Tracy, and everybody, I have to run. I'll get answers to those questions, and I will also send you the PowerPoint. You feel free to share it. And if there's any other questions that came into the chat, Paula, that I haven't answered, just send them to me and I'll get back to everybody. But I apologize, I have to run.
No worries, Matt. Thank you so much.
Good seeing all of you.
Yes,
Thank you, Matt.
You're very welcome.
Okay.
You too. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. I'm going to make my 1 minute plug before people start leaving. We welcome anyone who's interested in becoming a member. I'm going to put the link in the chat for our application. You do not have to be in Illinois to become an ILLBA member. You will see the information on there. If you're interested, please fill out the form and send it back to me. We do associate memberships as well outside of Illinois, Indiana, and Wisconsin. We'd love to have you. And we're
Agreed.
a great bunch of people too. Anyway,
Anybody have any other questions before we
Yeah, I
break
just
up?
want to add one of the remarks that we've had with the feedback regarding the survey for the city of Chicago was looking for additional information from the city or real-time information from the airports. And so just to let you know that becoming a member of the ILLBA, that we do receive that real-time information. You know, we're one of the first associations that the city or the airports reach out to. And as soon as we receive that information, we send it out to all of our members so that you are aware of what's going on. You know, just this past weekend, we had an issue at the airport regarding the booths and the stamps and technology and what have you. Paula reached out immediately, and I think it was within 1 or 2 hours that we received a response and exactly what was going on down there and what we could expect.
actually 15 minutes, believe it or not, they were right on it. So yeah, it's great.
You know, the other thing we're getting data from Convention and Tourism Bureau to Chicago as far as how many rooms were booked. They're giving us information on what's happening within the city as far as travelers, and that seems to be something useful. It's starting to move a little bit, but not as much as they'd like to. But they're monitoring room occupancy, restaurants. They're monitoring the tourism industry, and that they, are you sending that data to everybody when I send it to you, Paula, or is it just going to the board?
I have not been, but if it's okay, I will.
I think you
Definitely
should.
start sending it. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's good info.
Okay. We will do that.
And I think before we close, if we just want to open it up one more time, just to see if anyone has any questions or new topics that they'd like to discuss. I see Michael Barretto just jumped on. Hi, Mike.
Oh, thank you, Gus. I'm so glad you could join us.
Hey, I just want to say thanks a lot for doing this. I've been feeling kind of in a bubble, so it's good to step out of the bubble and hear that things are moving forward and you guys are out there making it happen. And like I said, I really am interested in being of service if I can.
Okay. And I sent you the link to the application. I'll be talking to you. Thank you, Chris.
I'm proud to say that our temperature has risen above 0 degrees for the first time in about 48 hours.
Amen. Bring it down here. I do want to tell everyone also that our next meeting is March 16th, and the topic is going to be payment security. So we're going to spend a bit of time talking about ways that you can tighten things up to accept secure payments as much as you can in this crazy world. And I do have, and I'm losing people kind of quickly, but I do have a poll. If you don't mind, there's some topics on here. We're trying to collect information from folks. So I just put the poll up. It's really trying to get a little bit more information on topics you might find interesting. And most of you know me, so you can find me on Facebook, or if you come up with something that you'd like. We've been knocking it out of the park with all of our topics, but my creativity is starting to slow down. So I really want to hear from folks what they would be extremely interested in, so that we can keep tailoring these to our big reach. Yeah. So
Paula, you don't have it on here, but just based off of the information that Matt Daus just presented, I myself, and I think there might be a few others on this call, I would be interested in hearing a presentation from IRA regarding the Black Car Fund and how they started that and what was needed in order to start it.
Yep, noted. Thank you. I'll add that. I'll keep this open for
Maybe
another.
just to work with somebody directly that's already started this and just kind of walk us through getting it up and running,
Yeah.
if that's what we decide to do.
And we also have New York operators who live and breathe it. So I think we have resources from, yeah, I see Joanne nodding her head, and I know Jason, I know a few others, and we got Doug Schwartz, and I think Brendan is on here too. So, I mean, we definitely have great resources we can tap into, who live and breathe it every day. But Do you guys have any other questions today? Okay. All right.
Yes, do I look as gray on Zoom as I am in real life?
Well, next month we'll do
Forgot
it.
it. I'll
We'll
withdraw
wear
that question.
next
Better.
month we'll do a wear your mask to the meeting, you know? Just kidding. Does anybody have any last thoughts, questions for us or anything?
I think we're good.
I think
Okay.
you can wrap it
I
up.
would just like to say thank you. My name is Tom. I'm with Walsh Chauffeur Transportation in Tampa. Say thank you for inviting people outside your market to really get a good perspective of what's going on outside of our state, outside of our own market. So
Hey,
thank
you're
you.
welcome, Tom.
Hey, Tom, something about that, it's probably happening in your market too. I mean, anybody that's in another state, these guys are traveling, they got road shows going and they're hitting all the state legislators. They've got lobbyists already. They're moving for this agenda and it's going to happen quicker than we realize,
Yeah, understand. Definitely things to think about in advance.
you know?
So we have
So this black car fund thing could probably, I don't know if it can work over multiple, I don't think it could work over multiple locations. Where you could do a Midwest black car fund. You'd have to have all states cooperating in it or something, but I don't know. But it's something that its time has come.
I think so. And I think yeah, it'll be great to learn. It may not, may not mirror the same thing, but it'll be a great starting point. All right. I think we're good.
Yep.
Say thank you, Art.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
you,
Thanks,
everyone.
everybody. I appreciate your time. Bye, Richard.
Bye-bye.
Yes. Bye, guys. Hey, 43%. Wow. Okay.